I love the aesthetic of a fat tyre e-bike, but so many of them are starting to look awfully similar, let's face it. Which is why it's refreshing to see the Himiway Escape Pro come along and say, this isn't a bike with big wheels, it's a moped with pedals. I'm James Bruce, you're watching MakeUseOf.com reviews, and today I'm taking a look at the Escape Pro from HimwayBike.com, starting at $1,800, so you can find out if it's right for you. Visually, the Escape Pro exudes style and is quite striking with its untraditional moped-like fixed seat on a step-through thick frame, and features like the dual coil rear suspension. Even such tiny things as this little flourish on the bottom of the kickstand here and the faux leather handle with bold stitching. It sets the Escape Pro out in a sea of fat tyre e-bikes, even if much of the other components are in fact generic, like the Shimano 7-speed Altus gear system or 20x4-inch Kenda fat tyres that we've seen on everything else. Sadly, the aesthetics are slightly compromised by this web URL printed on the side in classic Arial font. I get that you want to advertise your company, but this is just a bit tacky, and I'm really tempted to paint over that with a bit of matte black body touch-up paint. Generally speaking though, the design is so fun and unique. It really reminds me of my first ever motorbike, the Honda Zuma, or Mini Ruckus, I think it was called here. So throughout this review, you'll be seeing my wife ride the Himiway Escape Pro, and that's for two good reasons, and not just my cynical attempt at getting more views by having a girl in the thumbnail. Firstly, it was clear from the outset that I was too tall for this bike. While visually stunning, the generally low riding style and low fixed height seat, 28 inches from the pedals, does mean that it can be difficult for very tall riders. Now, Hemingway states recommended 5'1" to 6'1" should be fine on this. I'm 6'1" and it's not really. My legs ride up just ever so too high. But my wife is about 3 inches shorter than me, and it seemed ideal. So if you're 6'1" or taller, then it's difficult to recommend this. I would rule it out just because it's not ideal for our height. I haven't tested anyone much shorter than 5'8", but I would say 5'8" is the maximum for comfort. But as I said, there were two reasons, and the second is that I'm quite heavy. I need a fair bit of motor power to help me on an e-bike, especially a fat tyre one. Now, if this bike had been shipped from the US, that wouldn't have been an issue, because over there it comes with a 750-watt motor by default. So my valued US viewers, you can pretty much ignore this bit. However, this is an EU UK model, and it's limited to 250 watts. And that's not just speed limited, you know, you can't just press a button on the menu to disable that and bypass it. No, I mean, it physically has a different motor, a 250 watt motor, and this is apparently to comply with local laws and regulations in which anything above 250 watts is technically classed as a small motorbike and requires different licensing and even number plates. Curiously though, they do fit a grip twist throttle, which as far as I'm aware, makes it completely illegal in the UK anyway, so Now, I have tested higher powered bikes before, which are therefore illegal to ride on UK roads, but realistically the law is antiquated and I'd expect it to change soon. Unless the police stop you and examine the motor power, they aren't going to know. So some companies do sell higher powered e-bikes on the proviso that it's only for use on private ground, the same as e-scooters. Himiway has gone the other direction and just said, nope, we're going to fit it with a 250 watt motor. And perhaps that's because it's not a foldable bike. So it's a little harder to justify by saying, well, you can put it in your car and then travel to some private land to play with it. This would, of course, need to be ridden on the roads to get anywhere unless you actually own the private land at home. But still, that's the other reason it's not great for me. It just doesn't have the power to get me up a hill. Remember that fat tyre e-bikes are, in general, heavier than regular bikes. And this one especially is even heavier than a regular fat tyre e-bike. So assuming you're putting in the same amount of power as you normally would, this needs to add more power than a regular e-bike in order to do the same speed. Now, for me to ride this, even on level flat ground, requires some sort of motor input. Even for my wife, at half my weight, she struggled to ride it up a sort of heavy incline or on really rough terrain, which she wouldn't have had it been a full 750 watt motor or even higher. So anyone in the US watching this, ignore that whole spiel. It's not an issue for you. Anyone in Europe or the UK, you might want to be looking at different bikes with higher power if you want this for anything other than just flat city riding, which admittedly it would be very cool for, but this kind of rough terrain round here, 250 watt just doesn't cut it. So let's move on to some other specs. On the front fork here, you'll find a hydraulic suspension, adjustable and can be locked off for flat city riding. I mentioned the rear dual coil suspension. Combined, those two give a very comfortable ride. This rear suspension is especially good. Now, we were also sent a front basket for testing, so you can see we've fitted that, and you can see it in most of the shots of this bike. One slight word of warning though is that you might need to move the front headlight if you do this. You have to fit it to the bottom of the basket, and even then it can hit the front wheel with any very large bumps. Removing and moving around the light is not particularly easy to do. You have to unscrew this wooden part from inside the basket. Either way, if you're planning to do a lot of off-road riding with the front basket, it might be a good idea to invest in an alternative lighting solution, or figure out some way of mounting the light that isn't the default. Or just don't get the front basket for off-road use. Another small thing to note is that once you've fitted the light to the front basket instead of the front fork, it turns with the body of the bike, of course, and not with the front wheel. Very minor point, but might be relevant for those who do ride often at night. Speaking of which, the basket is great for running errands, and if you have a backpack to carry, it's much easier than trying to strap it to the back or leaving it on you. It ties in perfectly with the chunky metal aesthetics, and it features that wooden base that the rear pannier rack also has. Now, as well as a front basket, there's also an optional extended rear basket and a perfectly matching sort of delivery bag if you're getting this for your Deliveroo runs. Speaking of weights and capacity, the body is made of 6601 high-quality aluminium, and unlike competitors, that, plus the chunkier frame design, allows it to have a far higher payload capacity at around 330 pounds or 150 kilograms. That's about 50% higher than is typical. The bike itself is also heavier though, at 92 pounds or 41 kilograms. And while that's not a problem if you have experience riding, an actual motorbike, you know how to lift or handle it after a fall, it is about a third heavier than similar e-bikes, so it could be problematic for some people. I wouldn't lend this to, say, my elderly neighbour, because if it fell on top of her, she probably wouldn't get it off. Also, if you're prone to riding very long journeys and then having to come back without the battery, riding home on this without pedal assist, the sheer weight of the Escape Pro would make it pretty difficult. But in terms of carrying capacity and sheer utility, this is fantastic. So the Tektro Aries 180mm hydraulic disc brakes are decent enough and fairly common for replacement parts, but they felt a little bit weak for my tastes. I would have liked them to have more of a grip. The 48-volt 17.5 amp-hour or 840 watt-hour battery is removable, which is almost essential on something this heavy, so you can carry it somewhere else to charge it. And the wiring is neatly hidden away inside the main body. The range is somewhere between 30 to 50 miles, though it does depend on a whole range of factors as usual, like whether you're climbing up hills, the rider weight, the pedal assist mode that you're using, or whether it's pure throttle, etc., and the type of terrain. However, the capacity of 840 watt hours is above average. I mentioned the front light. You also have a rear brake light, of course. This is already fitted, and again, it suits the aesthetics. It's not just a sort of generic tacked-on thing. So, should you buy the Himiway Escape Pro? As long as you are 5'8" or under and can handle a heavyweight bike, it is a lot of fun, and it can be optionally kitted out with all manner of load-carrying baskets and such that really match the unique chunky moped aesthetic. The weight of the bike can be a problem though. It's difficult to recommend this with a 250 watt motor, particularly if you're hoping to tackle anything outside of flat cityscapes or to use the throttle only for driving it. It just doesn't have the needed power and doesn't match the comfortable low seat that's designed to just be sat on and not pedaled from. The pedals are almost an afterthought to get it legally recognized as an e-bike. For US viewers though, the 750 watt motor would be perfectly matched, and you should have no problems on any sort of challenging terrain. If you have been considering a fat tyre e-bike and don't mind the fact that this isn't foldable, If you just want something to travel locally with and not put in the back of your car, and then the unique design and great suspension gives the Himiway Escape Pro equal parts utility, comfort, and fun. Lastly, I wanted to mention that Himiway recently announced a selection of new bikes, which we may or may not cover in future, but I thought I'd mention them here, some of which are especially female focused, so that's always nice to see. First up is the Himiway Pony, which is like a super compact, ultra portable, foldable bike, 300-watt motor, weighing a mere 15 kilograms or 35 pounds, yet still manages to achieve 22 miles on the throttle alone, they're claiming. And that's around a $500 price point, which is excellent. They also announced the Rambler, which is a step-through city bike. I don't see anything particularly unique about that one, but it's around $1,300. Of more note is their newly announced Rhino model, which is a dual battery mountain bike model with new 4.5-inch fat tires rather than 4-inch here, and up to 100-mile range they're claiming. That starts at $3,000. They're also planning a Rhino Pro with a mid-drive 1,000-watt motor for $4,000, which seems expensive, but compared to other mid-drive bikes, it's actually quite competitive. I've linked the announcement video below, so do go check that out if you want more information on those and think they might be better for you rather than this. I'm James Bruce. Thanks to Himiway for sending this one over for review. Thanks to you for watching, and I'll see you in the next one.